It's become tradition for me to write a post reflecting on the year that's been. The year has been one to remember in so many ways. For the whole world, it was another year living in a pandemic. For me, it was probably one of the biggest years I've ever had in my life. I've met a few friends along the way, and so this year I thought I would start at the very beginning in January and journey through the past 12 months one at a time. I'm hoping it will give a big picture of how the year 2021 was for me, um, mostly through my exposure tasks that I did throughout the year, as they made up most of my treatment. I guess for those who are new friends, my treatment this year was for OCD and anxiety. Um, I have something called emetophobia, which is a fear of vomiting, and this extends into my OCD where I am afraid of anything to do with the gastrointestinal system. Scared of me vomiting, scared of others vomiting, and everything related to that. I have rules about food, safe periods, incubation periods, leaving the house, certain clothes, and like a lot of checking and reassurance seeking behaviours. So let's start at January. The morning of the first day of the year, we began our journey down to Melbourne, where I would be admitted to the Melbourne Clinic for the first time. To say I was afraid would be an understatement. I was being admitted to the general ward in the hope that I would be accepted into the 3-week OCD program. I spent the next 16 days in an almost near constant state of panic. OCD triggers left, right, and centre, especially relating to food, so I wasn't eating. And this just created a vicious cycle of hunger, nausea, anxiety, nausea, obsessions, anxiety, nausea, and so on. And on the 18th of January, I started the OCD program. So from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. each day, I would do exposure therapy where I would deliberately expose myself to triggers and make myself anxious. And then I would have to sit with the anxiety without doing any compulsions to take away the anxiety. And it was and still is one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do. I was looking back on my journal and reading over the ERP or exposure tasks that I was doing in January. So one of them was touching my toothbrush to each 4 quadrants of my mouth, putting a little bit of toothpaste on my finger and then putting it in my mouth. Another one was drinking a cup of heavily diluted apple juice over the course of 30 minutes. And I also did an exposure where I wore one of my pale blue dresses that I had my last huge panic attack in, where I was convinced that I was sick, and I had to see how long I could keep it on for. By the end of January, I could brush my teeth for a minute. And January also saw me miss my own girl's first day back at school and the first day I had with my grade 2s. So having spent the whole of January in hospital, along comes February. And I began working on exposure tasks involving ice cream containers and plastic bowls. I started off with just Googling plastic bowls, then looking at printed pictures of bowls, and then having the printed pictures of bowls in like triggering colours, so aqua, green, yellow, because they were the colours of the bowls that I had growing up that were, I guess, sick bowls. February saw me do a lot of thought exposure, where I would write statements like, perhaps I'll see a yellow or aqua plastic bucket today, or it's possible that I will need a bowl to be sick in. And I'd read these statements in my head, and then I would sit with the anxiety that it would bring up, which is surprisingly harder than you think. Another aspect of my treatment was going outside the hospital. Leaving the house has always been something that I've struggled with, and leaving the hospital was no different. I did a lot of exposure therapy around going out of the hospital for 15 minutes, despite how I physically felt or what my mind was telling me. So, whenever I felt like I was sick, I would go outside and allow the anxiety to come. And I was eventually able to go out and buy a takeaway coffee, but it would be a few more weeks until the OCD would actually let me drink it. My bathroom wall in the hospital was plastered with post-it notes that had other words for vomit on them, which I had to read multiple times a day. And once I was okay with those words, then I moved the post-it notes to my wall of photos that I had near my desk. And I would put the post-it notes next to the photos of the girls in Abraham, and I would do more thought exposure with those words and those photos and link them together. February proved to be pretty huge because I did back-to-back OCD programs, which meant that I was in hospital from the start of January till the 24th of February. So by the end of 2 months in hospital, I was able to walk past sinks and bins without checking what was in them. I could draw vomit. I was able to hold a plastic bowl. I was able to lean over the bowl as if I was pretending to be sick. I was able to have a plastic bowl beside my bed and like a sick bag that they use in hospitals in my room. I was able to write the trigger words and associate them with the girls in Abraham. I was able to finish a takeaway coffee, and I fought the intrusive thoughts that because I had exposed myself to all of this, then inevitably I will be sick. So after 2 months of treatment, I headed home on the 27th of February. The first day of March saw me back at home with my family and back at school in the classroom. So I dove straight back into work after coming out of 2 months of being in hospital. It was so good to be back at home, but the transition was really rough. I spent a lot of time trying to delete the word failure from my vocabulary and instead use the word setback. March saw me wrestle with the real world, and it sucked. Hospital had been somewhat predictable and a safe bubble to practice my exposure therapy in. The real world is, well, real. It was unpredictable, and I felt very alone in it all. I knew that I had to practice my exposure therapy at home, but it was a lot harder than I thought it would be. It was really easy to slip back into old habits and give in to compulsions and obsessions. And I'd probably say that I got through March hanging on by just a thread. I guess that brings us to April, and 4 months into the year, and I feel like I've already run about 10 marathons. April brought with it school holidays and time with the family. However, April also saw me push away a lot of people because I thought that I could do it on my own, and that I had to do this all on my own. I isolated myself, I withdrew, I cancelled plans, I gave in to OCD's every wish and command, and I lost hope. Abraham and I and my treating team talked about heading into hospital over the school holidays as like kind of a circuit breaker. However, we chose to stay at home and hope that some downtime would help. Unfortunately, the setbacks during April had me believing that there was no point in fighting anymore. However, part of me held on to hope that the OCD couldn't win. April turned into May, and things were going downhill pretty fast. I kept pushing through, pretending that things weren't as bad as they actually were. However, as always, the usual cracks began to appear, and I couldn't hide it anymore. I was supposed to go back to the Melbourne Clinic in June to continue my treatment for OCD. but it was clear that I wasn't going to make it to June. It became harder and harder for me to continue exposure therapy, work full time, be a mum and a wife. So on the 4th of May, a referral was sent to the Melbourne Clinic, and the next day I found out that I was going to go back into hospital on the Saturday. I spent 4 hours that day trying to convince Abraham that I didn't need to go, that I wasn't sick enough, that there was people sicker than me, and that I didn't deserve to go. I was distraught about the people that I was letting down, especially Abraham and the girls. I felt like I was ruining their lives. So on the 8th of May, I began my second admission at the Melbourne Clinic, and I was on the general ward again until there was space for me in the OCD program. In the middle of May, I found myself unable to drink water from my water bottle or anywhere else for nearly 2 days because of an incidental exposure, and I convinced myself that the water in the hospital was contaminated. One day I didn't eat anything until dinner time because I was convinced that I was sick. Another day it took me 8 hours to use the washing machine, the communal washing machine at hospital, because someone had used it previously that I deemed was sick. On a happy note, I guess May saw me have a visit from the girls and Abraham for my birthday. The week leading up to this was pretty tough, knowing that I had to go out to the zoo with them for my 4 hours leave. I put on a brave face and I did it for them, hoping they wouldn't notice just how hard it was for me to do, but I knew I needed to be there for them. After spending the month of May in hospital, along came June. This month in the OCD program, I worked on like a graded exposure where I started off with cartoon pictures of cartoons vomiting, and moved to people looking nauseous or hugging a toilet bowl. I also used photos of children who like looked sick, and people actually throwing up, as well as pictures of like vomit on the footpath. June saw me fill a sick bag with water and then leave it beside my bed, and empty it into the sink the next morning. I progressed to warm water to make it feel more realistic, and was eventually able to move from one of the facilitators emptying it in the hallway without me seeing it to me being able to empty it on my own in my own room. I continued my exposures from last time, where I'd go out and get a coffee and something to eat, but this time I would actually finish it. I had a few rules surrounding this takeaway coffee thing that the OCD had put up that I needed to break down. So like, I wasn't allowed to drink coffee before 11 a.m, otherwise I'd get sick. And it had to be lactose free because the OCD told me I was lactose intolerant, even though I'm actually not lactose intolerant. June saw me have some new rituals emerge that I hadn't had before or hadn't done before, which actually really upset me because I thought I knew all of OCD's tricks. I was now washing my hands a lot more, and at one stage I wasn't allowed to sit or lie down on my bed for fear of getting sick. So that saw me spend 2 nights sleeping on my floor in the room at hospital, and I eventually navigated these new rituals and was able to sleep on my bed after 2 days, with some rituals that I had to do, but I was still able to be on my bed. Lastly, in June in the program, I began watching like vomiting scenes from movies, first with the sound off and then with the sound on. I chose to do movie scenes because they aren't as real as if it were an actual person. We kind of then just slipped into July, and the 3rd of July was really hard. I had to break the news to my husband and girls that I wasn't coming home just yet, even though that was the plan. At that stage, I'd spent 4 months total in hospital for the year. However, I knew I wasn't ready to go home, and it took me a while to find the assertiveness and the courage to let my treating team know that I wasn't ready. I spent an extra week in hospital, and I left home I left for home on the 9th of July, after having 117 days in hospital for the year. Once I got home, I didn't return to the classroom like last time. I knew that the rest of 2021 would include more hospital admissions, and it wasn't fair on the beautiful kids in my class. I couldn't keep coming and going with them not knowing who their teacher was going to be. I had decided to take the term off school, which was done through a lot of pain and tears, but knew that it was for the best. Unexpectedly, on the 19th of July, I received a call that I'd been accepted into a 4-week emotional management program at the Melbourne Clinic. So my treating team had decided that I'd done a lot of work on my OCD in doing the 4 OCD programs, and now it was time to treat the underlying trauma and emotional regulation side of things. So on the 24th of July, I began my 3rd admission to the Melbourne Clinic. August came and saw me complete the emotional management program, which is based on DBT therapy. It was a lot of information during the classes each day, but it was very practical, and I could see it be of use in my everyday life. I remember we had to do checkouts after each session, and we'd use 2 words to describe how we were feeling, and a few of the words I often used were anxious, overwhelmed, inadequate, failure, vulnerable, sometimes hopeful. I think the hardest part was balancing the fact that I still had OCD, and it wouldn't just go away while I completed this other program. It's like I was still doing daily exposures and managing all the other incidental exposures that would happen in the hospital. On the 20th of August, that marked day 146 in hospital for the year, and it looked like that day 147 would be my last day in hospital for the whole year. I was leaving the hospital on the 21st of August without a future admission date, which is something that had never happened before, and it was pretty scary. August also saw me officially resign from my job, which brought many tears and a lot of intense feelings of being a failure. As it happened, day 147 actually wasn't going to be my last day in hospital, as I had an incident which saw me stay in hospital for an extra week. So I left hospital on the 26th of August after 152 days in hospital. Then comes September. This month saw me say goodbye to my class. I went into school and sat down with them and chatted to them about why I was leaving, where I was going, and like how much I was going to miss them. So September meant for us that we were moving to Mildura from Robinvale. Because I quit my job, we no longer had use of the schoolhouse, so we had to make the move in October. I have to say that September was really hard. If I thought May was hard, September was something else. I came out of hospital and only got worse. So on the 23rd of September, which is one day before Bella's birthday, we made the drive down to Melbourne again for me to be admitted for a short stay for only 12 days. This admission was a bit different. They called it a crisis admission. I didn't really like that term, but I guess you could say that I was in crisis. So it was kind of fitting. Everything had become so overwhelming and so relentless that I had made plans not to be around in October. I didn't see any other way out. I'd had enough, and I was done. September 30 came, and it was probably one of the hardest days that I've ever had. I spent the night in ICU so that they could keep a closer eye on me. And I don't think I've ever cried that much in my life. I woke up in ICU on the 1st of October, alive and still here. September had ended and October had begun. A few of my close friends named the 1st of October my victory day, a day where the old was in the past and the new could begin, a sort of new beginnings, if you will. I remember leaving ICU on the afternoon of the 1st with a renewed sense of hope. Like I had to keep fighting. My life was worth something, that I was worth something, even if I didn't believe it or feel it. A couple of days later, on the 4th of October, I left hospital and drove back to Robinvale to move house on the 9th. Moving to Mildura into our beautiful new house was probably one of the best things that's happened this year. I became a home learning mum for the girls and loved being able to be involved in their learning and their lives. I actually started relief teaching at 2 local schools when school went back, and it was great to be back in the classroom. Unfortunately, it didn't last very long. By the 3rd of November, I realised that I'd jumped in too quick. Despite thinking that I felt really good, I was still fragile, broken, and working through a lot of stuff. The plan from the start was to not work at all in term 4. That was by the recommendation of my treating team, and then I would head back into the classroom in 2022. But I thought I could do it, and I gave it a go. It was a hard pill to swallow, seeing that the thing I love doing is actually not the best for me right now. My body wasn't ready, my mind wasn't ready, and emotionally and mentally I wasn't ready. November saw me face my intense fear of getting the COVID vaccination. After a cancelled appointment and endless panic attacks, endless Googling of side effects, and feeling like a failure, I finally did it. November saw lots of time with the girls and Abraham, resting and relearning how to live in the real world. Mildura allowed me to go to the shops more, so to do exposure therapy at the shops in the supermarket, go out in the car and drive 20 minutes to the shops even if I was feeling sick or was convinced that if I stepped out the door I would be sick. November was a massive month of growth for me. I was doing a lot of things the OCD said that I couldn't. I was ritualizing less and obsessing less, and I was finding my feet, and I felt like I was really learning to live life. And that brings us up to December. This month marks the longest stretch I've been out of hospital for the year. The 3rd of December was the date that I was offered my dream job at the girls' school teaching grade 1-2. I can't believe that I have an opportunity to work at such a loving, caring and supportive school next year. December also brought a massive challenge for us all, especially me. On Friday the 24th, so Christmas Eve, both girls tested positive for COVID and we were plunged into isolation. COVID was a big scary thing that I'd been afraid of for so long. I approached it initially with a lot of anxiety, and then I just kind of went into mum mode and took care of my girls. Cuddles, sharing beds, sharing utensils, being together. I was sure Abraham and I were going to contract COVID from the girls, but both of us received negative PCR test results and will be free on the 31st of December and out of isolation. I feel like I've come out of this trial a lot stronger with renewed hope and resilience. December also saw us celebrate Christmas, the birth of our Saviour Jesus Christ, and I guess it's fitting that I end this reflection of 2021 on this note because I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for God. I feel like that part of the story deserves a whole other video, which one day I will do, But the number of times the Lord has shown up for me during this year is incredible. My life is worth living because of Him and His unfailing love. He picked me up out of the pit of despair and set my feet on solid ground. I'm learning each day to trust Him more, believe He loves me for me, and learning to remember that the truth is the truth no matter what I feel. I'm giving Him all the glory for me being here today to tell you this story. I'm not the person I was in January. I actually got so emotional reading the exposure tasks that I found so difficult in January. They're actually nothing to me now, like brushing my teeth, drinking apple juice, walking past bins and sinks without checking. I can do these things now without anxiety or ritual. I'm stronger than I was, I'm wiser than I was, I'm more resilient, and I'm more able to handle what life throws at me. I honestly wouldn't change a thing about this year. It was all for a purpose. This year I survived, but next year I want to live.